Yo, 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 this is Dane, aka Cheesy Danish.
This is Tim, aka Pirate Tom.
And this is episode 4 of Was It Worth It? The part podcast, part review show where two wild and crazy dudes play an inexpensive indie game on the Steam platform, discuss their intimate time spent with said game, and eventually decide whether or not they each felt the game was worth it. Sometimes we're in agreement, sometimes we aren't, but either way, we'll break down our experience for you and hopefully be entertaining in the process. This time around, we played PixelJunk Shooter.
Yes, and I want to mention that Was It Worth It is brought to you by SharcTank.com. PixelJunk Shooter is the fourth game in the PixelJunk series developed by Q Games and released for the PlayStation 3 originally in 2009. Recently, it was ported to the PC and released on Steam, which is the version that me and Dane played. It retailed for $8.99 on Steam. PixelJunk Shooter is a multi-directional, two-dimensional spaceship shooter game where you play as a spaceship crew who are visiting a planet they got an SOS signal from, and you're going deep down in the mines of this planet to rescue a mining crew who is stranded in the mines. And the mines of the specific planet has 3 different episodes, and each episode is separated into multiple different stages. Each episode has a focus on something that you have to traverse, be it magma, ice, or a magnetic fluid that is found in the mines. And in the process of saving these stranded miners, you are also fighting off creatures that are indigenous to the planet, as well as solving puzzles that are involved the different fluids that are in each area of the mine.
Yeah, you know, those puzzle aspects actually are one of, I think, the most unique features of this game. You know, for instance, you'll be tasked with, like, pouring water into magma to create dirt, or using magnetism to move that weird magnetic oil into weighted tanks, you know, to progress in the game. It's actually been described as part retro video game, part chemistry set, and I'd say that that's accurate.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, now we can move into individual aspects of this game and I guess how we felt about them individually. Personally, I felt the graphics were pretty cool. The style's really simple, but that's definitely the point. There's some destructible terrain and some physics going on with the way, like, the liquids will spill when you remove terrain from under them, and that actually, you know, looked pretty cool for just being, like, 2D and very simplistic. You know, last week I likened the game's style to DOS-based platformers, but I realize now that I was mistaken. What I was really thinking of was the destructible terrain in the old Worms games, which I'm a huge fan of, so there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and the style was a little bit reminiscent of Worms too, and just the art style, and I really enjoyed that. That was probably my favorite part of the game. Well, one of my favorite parts of the game was the art style. I thought it looked great.
Yeah, totally. Like, the colors and the shading, like the shading technique they used was really cool.
The color palette was brilliant. I really enjoyed that.
Definitely. I mean, considering it all takes place underground, they actually managed to make everything look bright and interesting, for the most part.
Right.
On the downside, in my opinion, none of the enemy designs were very impressive. I found them to be sort of repetitive and boring, like the various, you know, worms that shoot lasers at you and whatnot. But I guess that's not really important in the grand scheme of things. They were just sort of obstacles for you to destroy.
Yeah, and not only graphically, but I think in terms of mechanics, all the enemies were kind of repetitive too. Like, you fight this one, and then you fight an upgraded version of the same thing that's blue the next episode, and then so on and so forth. So yeah, that was kind of lacking.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on from the graphics, the gameplay for me was hit and miss. I do love me some good puzzles, and there are a few of those scattered throughout this game. I guess more than a few, but...
Well, more or less all puzzles.
Yeah, but I mean, not all of them were great.
I agree.
It felt a little inconsistent. Between each good, well-balanced puzzle were a number of stages that were either too quick and easy or had aspects that would kill you pretty much immediately unless you knew exactly what was coming. And to add insult to injury, that would often happen at the end of the stage after several minutes of work, and you'd have to start over.
Yeah, I think in general, most of the puzzles were just really, really easy, and I was wondering if that was because it was originally designed for console, and because we have a much easier time controlling the ship with the PC keyboard and mouse. That maybe,
I didn't think about that.
Maybe they were just a little easier because of that.
Oh yeah, and you know, I mentioned dying immediately to something, you know, in the stage itself. While the game was mostly glitch-free, I did have at least 3 times where my ship exploded for seemingly no reason I could come up with, which was frustrating.
Yeah, I did run into that a couple times, and I think I figured out that sometimes lava drips down and gets kind of stuck in the wall, and you can't really see it, so if you hit the wall right there, It thinks you're hitting lava, and what happens when you hit lava is it brings your heat gauge up to the max, and then you just kind of spiral out of control until you hit something, unless you run into water and it cools your ship. Well, in this case, it's seeing your heat gauge immediately going up. Simultaneously, you're hitting a wall, so I think it just creates an explosion. I think it
just blows you up immediately?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably not intended, but I think that's what was happening to me a couple times.
Yeah, that makes sense because, and I actually didn't really like this, but you're right. Once enough lava has trickled off of the surface, there's still a very thin, virtually invisible layer of lava. It's the last little bit that's going to trickle off, and while it's invisible, it still affects you the same way a full pool of lava does. So yeah, that was kind of annoying.
That was especially frustrating for me. And there was at least one time that I can think of where my ship just randomly blew up in the middle of the air. So I don't know. I think it was a little glitchy.
Yeah, maybe there was a glitch like that. Although, on the bright side, I can't really think of any other glitches that I experienced. Can you?
No. Other than that, the game ran smoothly.
Cool. Especially for a port. That's always good. Oh yeah, and also related to gameplay, I did want to mention that one of the cooler parts of the game involved getting a temporary ship upgrade that would change your powers around. And my favorite of those was the inverted suit, which basically made it so you can fly around in the lava, you can submerge yourself in lava, but you need to stay away from the water. It kind of reversed the temperature mechanics. And I liked that one just because the puzzles surrounding those mechanics were especially challenging and clever. On the flip side, I hated using the magma suit, which replaced your missiles with a stream of lava, because it didn't actually make you impervious to lava or heat, which you were spewing everywhere. There were very few angles I could actually shoot the lava at without a tiny bit of it coming back, touching me, and killing me immediately, which to me, that design seemed kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, I definitely seppuku'd myself a few times with the magma suit. However, the interesting thing with the magma suit is you're usually using it to melt ice away to get to some stranded miners, and the thing about it that made it a little more interesting was that you couldn't just mindlessly dump magma onto the ice, because you would often kill the person you're trying to save because you would put too much magma through. So that made it a little tougher challenge.
Yeah, those puzzle mechanics were actually pretty cool. So next I want to bring up the music. The music in this game is actually pretty awesome on its own. In my opinion, it actually doesn't really fit the theme of the game. Like, most of the tracks sound like they were composed separately from the game and then just thrown in because they needed something there, except for the title theme. The title theme definitely kind of had the lonely, mind-dwelling kind of sound to it, but the level themes, the stage themes were just... they were fast-paced and high energy, and they had a really nice blend of synthy electronic elements and traditional instrumentation like acoustic guitar. But a major complaint I do have with the music is that there are some issues with the music looping. It seems like they tried to implement that thing that Faster Than Light does with its music, where you sort of hear a mellow version of the stage theme when you're exploring, but then it gets more pumped up with additional instrumentation as soon as combat starts. And that did work well most of the time, but when the looping screwed up, it stuck out to me like a sore thumb.
Yeah, I didn't actually have any issues with it looping improperly, but I did have situations where the music would just kind of drop out and it would be gone, and I was wondering where it went.
Yeah, I kind of had that experience too. Yeah, you'd be flying around kind of, working on the puzzles or whatever, and the music was just gone. Sometimes it would come back after a while, maybe when you died. I don't remember. But usually you'd have to finish the stage and move on to the next one, and then your music would come back, and that was a little weird.
Yeah, I think in general the music was really good. Well, it was hit and miss, I would say, to an extent, but the tracks that I liked, I loved. It's funny that you mentioned the title song, because I do think it fits the theme of the game better than the other tracks, but it was actually my least favorite track in the game. And I think maybe you're right that the music doesn't really fit the theme of the game, because the theme of the game was just kind of tacked on. Like, that's how it seemed to me. In my opinion, that's what I think happened. Like, they had this idea for this shooter that they wanted to do, and they had these mechanics and these puzzles thought out, and they just kind of said, well, we'll make them saving space miners. Like,
gotcha. So the theme in this case being going, dwelling underground and saving miners.
Exactly. Because there were some puzzles where I was like, okay, this is kind of a neat puzzle, but what I'm doing doesn't really make sense from a thematic point of view.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, in that sense, I'm sure that they intended for the theme or the story to just take a back seat to the puzzles and the gameplay.
Right, and someone with a strong tabletop gaming background, there's a lot of board games, specifically European board games, that do that. They come up with a mechanic and they love it. A very popular game like that is Dominion. It's a great example of a deck builder. In fact, it's the prime example of a deck builder in many people's opinion. but the theme just doesn't really make sense. But
Right.
that's fine because it's a great game otherwise.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples of that in both tabletop and video gaming.
Yeah.
So the last major aspect of this game that I wanted to bring up was something that actually really bugged me. There's a collection aspect in this game in the form of these little diamonds that are hidden all over various stages. Some of them are really hidden out of sight, deep beneath destroyable terrain or tucked away in secret off-screen zones. At first, these diamonds seem completely optional, but it's revealed that you need to collect a certain number of them as you're progressing through the game to unlock the final stage of each episode. As I played through the first and second episode, just collecting whichever diamonds I came across, I had no problem unlocking the final stages of those particular episodes. As I approached the end of the third and final episode, however, I discovered that the final stage was completely locked, and I needed close to 30 more diamonds to unlock it.
You know, I didn't actually run into that issue because I started specifically looking for diamonds to collect them because I kind of expected that the diamonds would be spent on upgrades for your ship or something, which I was really disappointed when that didn't come around. I like how they did the temporary upgrades, but I kind of wish there was more in terms of customizability for what you can do with your ship.
So it seemed like the diamonds, or you were hoping the diamonds would be some sort of currency.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of, you know, they're diamonds. Their diamonds are worth money, you know. It just made sense to me that it would be a currency.
Yeah, like what story-related purpose, you know, how would those diamonds make it so you can actually now go and do the next level, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense.
That was kind of lame. And the fact that I had to go back and collect so many more diamonds just so I could finish the game, that wasn't like the good type of backtracking where you gain a new skill and you need to go back to unlock new areas like in Castlevania or Metroid. This was just the game telling me to repeat the same crap I already did, except waste my sweet time poking around every little nook and cranny. Otherwise, I won't be allowed to see new content. And I'll also add that I was pretty much tired of the game at that point, and I just wanted to be done with it so we could do this review, so that didn't help.
Yeah, I can see how that would be an issue. So I think now's a good time to start summing up our personal experiences with the game.
Sure.
So my experience was, I kind of, it was fun for the most part, I feel like. Something that I didn't mention earlier, but the thing that stood out the best to me in terms of the game was just how crisp the mechanics were. I never had an issue thinking, okay, I want my ship to do this, and the controls were so tight that I could just do whatever I wanted my ship to do. And I think that's something worth mentioning because it definitely is a standout thing.
Especially for a port.
Oh yeah, that's great for a port. The puzzles were easy. There were a few difficult ones, and there were some frustrating moments, like you mentioned, where you'd be right at the end of a stage and you die no fault of your own. It's just the level threw something at you that you didn't anticipate, and so you died and you had to start over. And it's kind of frustrating when you have to redo a whole stage, or not a full stage, but a whole area of a stage just because of one little thing dicking you.
Right.
Especially when it's one of those rare areas that actually has a difficult puzzle to get through.
Yeah.
Other than that, I was kind of on the edge whether or not the game was worth it or not, because I did enjoy the music, and it felt good playing the game because the controls were so tight. And eventually I kind of got fatigued by it, like you were saying, like you were tired of the game. I can see that because it's repetitive, and other than the new upgrade elements, it doesn't, you're seeing a lot of the same stuff.
Sure.
But the thing that really put the nail in the coffin for me to say the game isn't worth it is the final boss fight. The first two boss fights are fun, and they're reminiscent of old school games, and it was kind of fun. But the last boss was just... I'll just say this without trying to spoil too much. It was broken up into two phases, and the first phase was fun and neat and very reminiscent to old school shooters, just like the first two bosses in the game were. But then the second half was really tedious, and it actually glitched on me where I spent 15 minutes just on the second phase of this boss before I realized it must be broken, and I killed myself to start the fight over. And even without that, I feel like that the second half of the boss fight was really tedious, and they could have been done much better.
Yeah,
So,
and you mentioned that made it not worth it for you, so you've pretty much already said how you feel about it.
Right.
I could see how having such a struggle with the final boss of the game, when it's no fault of your own, I could see how that would pretty much crap all over the entire experience of the game.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, like you, I had fatigue of the game. I was like, I wanted it to be over. I was just, and that was just kind of like, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like I wanted nothing to do with it. But I did finish the game to get the twist ending.
Yeah, that was Well, I mean, I guess the second one will probably be ported to Steam eventually too, and
and then
I don't know if I'll
won't
ever
buy
play it.
Yeah.
But so to sum up my total experience with this game, my initial impression was that I really liked the visual style of the game, and I was excited to play a flying shooter with heavy puzzle elements, since not only is that a unique combination, but I tend not to get along with traditional shoot-'em-up games, and this seemed like a fresh take on them. Well, as I played through it, the mystique of the mostly creative, physics-based puzzles quickly wore off, and I found the gameplay getting repetitive, occasionally even frustrating, like when I'd get instantly killed by something I literally could not have seen coming, like we mentioned a couple times. And I hated having to go back and get all those diamonds. I mean, that was tedious and not necessary. If the game wasn't a fairly quick 5 to 7 hours, and if I didn't have the fairly enjoyable, high-energy soundtrack to keep me going, I probably would have given up on it despite having to do this review. Which means for me, PixelJunk Shooter was also not worth it.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up this review. So next week, do we come up with the game?
Yeah, I think it was between Risk of Rain and Contrast. What do you think?
Well, I think that Risk of Rain is also a platformer shooter, kind of like PixelJunk in a way.
Yeah, definitely with the retro style.
Yeah, so maybe Contrast would be the best one to go for.
Sure, we can mix it up, and I am really excited to try out Contrast. We saw it at Penny Arcade Expo. It actually looks pretty big budget, high budget for a $15 indie game. So
yeah, I definitely was blown away by the fact that it's only $15. So I'm excited to play it.
Yep. All right, so we will play Contrast next week. See you guys then. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.